Rain begins softly, a distant wind howls, the occasional creak of old wood. Tonight, as the winter winds howl against the windows and the rain taps steadily on the roof, I invite you to listen not just to a story, but to a warning. For in the deepest corners of winter, when the snow falls heavy, when the fire crackles softly in the hearth, there are stories that dare not be forgotten. This is one of them. A true story. Of a family, a curse, and a mother's sacrifice. The sound of a faint wind rises, a light tapping sound increases with the rain. It begins on Christmas Eve, much like tonight. A night where the cold seeps through every crack in the walls, and the shadows feel closer. A night when something older than time itself stirs from the darkness. This is the story of the Harrows, a family, once untouched by grief, whose fate would change forever when they crossed paths with something no one could outrun. Not even love. The sound of a carriage on snow, crunching softly under the wheels. Faint sounds of voices and carriage bells. The Harrows arrived on Christmas Eve. Their carriage, a small, worn thing, creaked as it rolled across frozen ground. The winter had arrived earlier than usual that year, its chill biting at their faces as the snow began to fall thicker and faster. Eleanor Harrow, her husband Thomas, and their young son Samuel had been traveling for hours. They were looking for a fresh start, far from the busy streets of London. A secluded manor, hidden deep in the countryside, had been left vacant for years. It seemed perfect for a family seeking peace, or perhaps an escape from the weight of their own lives. The sound of snow falling outside, a quiet settling of the house's interior noises, an occasional creak of wood. As they arrived, the wind whispered against the stone walls of the manor. Eleanor shivered. She stood for a moment, staring at the darkened house. Something about it felt off. But perhaps it was just the season, the isolation that made it feel so empty. The family carried their things inside, the warmth of the hearth greeting them with a fragile promise of comfort. The fire crackled as Thomas unpacked, while Eleanor settled Samuel in the nursery, humming an old lullaby as the snow continued to fall outside. In the darkened room, shadows stretched long across the floor, moving with the flickering flames. The sound of a crackling fire, the wind howling slightly louder outside. The sounds of soft footsteps and whispering whined through the cracks. That night, as the family slept, something stirred in the house. Eleanor awoke suddenly, her heart racing. There was a sound, a faint giggle, like the tinkling of a child's laugh, echoing down the hallway. Soft, like a dream. She lay still for a moment, unsure whether it was the wind or something else. Samuel, sleeping peacefully beside her, had not stirred. The laugh came again, and this time, Eleanor's skin prickled. It was too clear. Too real. She slipped from the warmth of the bed and stood up, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. Wind begins to pick up. The sound of faint footsteps on wood, just beyond reach, growing clearer. Eleanor moved cautiously down the hallway. Each step was slower than the last. The house creaked and groaned around her, as though it had not known life in so long. When she reached the end of the corridor, she saw nothing. Only darkness. Only the emptiness that greeted her in the cold house. The rain started harder, lashing at the windows as if in response to her unease. She told herself it was nothing. The wind. Perhaps a dream. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something watched her from the shadows. Heavy rain, the sound of a faint scratching against glass. The house creaks as if responding to unseen pressure. The days passed slowly after that. Christmas came, though it felt distant, hollow. The house remained quiet, save for the wind and the persistent sound of rain, tapping against the windows. Eleanor noticed small things at first, things she couldn't explain. A flickering candle when there was no draft, the sound of small footsteps when Samuel had long since gone to bed. She thought she was imagining it. But when she found the wet footprints in the nursery, her heart sank. Tiny, childlike footprints, leading from the crib, toward the cold, dark window. Samuel had not moved from his bed. The tracks led to nothing, stopping just short of the window. Eleanor blinked and the rain began again, louder than before. A soft, low thudding sound in the background, like a soft knock, growing louder. She tried to dismiss it, told herself it was the house settling. But deep in her heart, Eleanor knew something was wrong. This house had lived before. Its walls held secrets. Distant, faint sound of a child's giggle, followed by an eerie, soft whispering that slowly fades in and out. And then, one evening, it came the ghost. Not a shadow, but something more. Something real. Eleanor was sitting by the fire, rocking Samuel to sleep, when she saw it from the corner of her eye. A small figure. Standing in the doorway. A pale child, dressed in old, wet clothes. Its face was hollow, its eyes too wide, too dark. The child tilted its head, as if asking a question. Eleanor froze. She dropped the rocking chair. The fire flickered and dimmed. The child's eyes never left her. It stepped forward, slowly, its feet silent on the wooden floor. Eleanor gasped. And in that moment, the figure vanished. Not with a bang, not with a flash, but simply gone. The silence returned. Only the wind and the rain remained. Eleanor stared at the doorway, the cold air surrounding her like a breath on her neck. Was she imagining it? Was it real? Or was it something far worse, a glimpse into another world? The next few days brought only more dread. The whispers grew louder. The child's laughter grew more frequent, though no one could find the source. Eleanor's thoughts were consumed. She could not sleep. She could not rest. She began to search through old trunks in the attic, hoping to find anything that would explain what she had seen. And then she found it. Tucked under the floorboards, hidden away in the dust, was a small, tattered doll. Its clothes were old, faded, its face cracked. But there was something strange. Water, or perhaps something darker, seemed to trickle down its cheek. Eleanor recoiled, her blood running cold. The whisper came again. It was softer this time, almost tender. But the terror was undeniable. The day after finding the doll, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the house. The air felt thicker, heavier. Each step she took seemed to echo louder than before. And in the silence that followed, her own mind seemed to taunt her with questions she could not answer. Thomas had been skeptical of her fears, chalking it all up to stress, the isolation, perhaps even the weather. But even he could not ignore the sudden change in Samuel. The once playful, curious child had grown withdrawn, his eyes always fixed on something unseen, his voice barely a whisper. It was as if the child, once full of life, was slowly being drained away. That evening, Eleanor could take it no longer. She knew she had to find answers, even if the truth was too horrifying to bear. She opened the diary she had discovered in the attic, a book that once belonged to the manor's previous owner. Pages yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were clear. The diary spoke of a child who had once lived in the manor, a boy named William. He had been a lively, cheerful child, beloved. Beloved by all who knew him. But one winter, the boy had vanished. Gone without a trace. His mother, stricken with grief, had been left to wander the house. She had to face the truth: this wasn't just a haunting. It was the child's spirit, trapped between worlds, seeking her out. And with it came an undeniable demand. She had already given her soul to this place. She had already paid the price. As if to confirm her worst fear, the child appeared again, standing in the doorway. His hollow eyes met hers. This time, there was no fear. Only longing. His lips parted, and in a voice not his own, he spoke. You knew. You knew what you had to do. Eleanor backed away slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. What do you want from me? She whispered, her voice trembling. The child's figure grew clearer, more solid, as if the very air around him had thickened. You have what I need. What I have always needed, he said, his voice cold as ice. I need you. Your soul. Eleanor knew what she had to do. But her heart ached with the weight of it. She had already sacrificed so much for her child. Now, it seemed, her own soul would be the price. But she couldn't bear the thought of Samuel being trapped, of losing him forever. Not when she had already given everything to save him. She turned to face the figure of the child, now standing at the foot of the bed. Her grip tightened on the doll, the ragged cloth worn and stained. She spoke the words aloud, "I release you. I atone for what was done." There was a pause. The child's eyes narrowed, as though considering her words. Then, with a sudden motion, the ghost lunged forward, and the air grew freezing cold. Eleanor gasped as the wind seemed to claw at her skin, pulling her toward the figure. The sound of whispers rose around her, echoing her own name, calling her toward the unknown. "This is my price," the child said. "This is your final chance." The sound of wind and rain intensifies, the whispers growing louder. With trembling hands, Eleanor reached for the doll. She held it to her chest, and with one final, desperate cry, she said, "I release you from your torment. I free you." The room seemed to darken, the temperature plunging lower with each passing second. The child's form flickered, as if the very air could no longer hold his presence. Then, with a sound like the breaking of ice, the figure began to dissolve. For a moment, Eleanor thought she had failed. She thought the child's soul would never be freed. But as the figure slowly vanished, the air lightened, the oppressive weight lifting from her shoulders. The storm outside calmed, the wind dying down. The rain faded into a gentle drizzle. In that moment, Eleanor understood. The price had been paid. Her soul was no longer forfeit. The child, freed from its torment, had moved on. The house, too, seemed to settle, as if it had found its peace. But the memory lingered. The sacrifice, the truth, and the knowledge that no price is ever truly paid without consequence. The sound of rain fades, leaving behind a calm and still atmosphere. The next day, the house was still. The sky outside cleared, the sun breaking through the heavy clouds. The storm had passed, and so had the darkness that had once consumed the manor. Samuel woke, his bright eyes full of life once more. Thomas, unaware of the horrors they had faced, smiled at the peace that had settled over their home. But Eleanor knew the truth. The house would never truly be free. For as long as the wind howled through the trees, as long as the rain tapped at the windows, the memory of what happened there would never fade. It would linger in the whispers of the past, in the cold touch of the child who had walked between worlds. The manor was empty again. Not because the family had left, but because the ghosts had finally been laid to rest. The price had been paid. And in the silence that followed, only the rain remained. Thank you for listening. If you find yourself in a house on a stormy night, with the rain tapping at the windows and the wind howling through the trees, remember this story. For there are some debts that cannot be paid, and some spirits that never truly rest. A soft pause as the final sounds of rain gently fade away.